I think it's interesting. The president just said something which is that on the day after the attack, he went in the Rose Garden and said that this was an act of terror.
That's what I said.
You said in the Rose Garden, the day after the attack, it was an act of terror. It was not a spontaneous demonstration. Is that what you're saying?
Please proceed, Governor.
I want to make sure we get that for the record, because it took the president 14 days before he called the attack in Benghazi an act of terror.
Get the transcript.
He did, in fact, sir. So let me call it an act of terror.
Can you say that a little louder, Candy?
He did call it an act of terror. It did as well take 2 weeks or so for the whole idea of there being a riot out there about this tape to come out. You're correct about that.
This morning, you went out of your way to avoid the use of the word terrorism in connection with the Libya attack. Right. Do you believe that this was a terrorist attack?
Well, it's too early to know exactly how this came about, what group was involved. Get the transcript.
He did, in fact, sir. So let me call it an act of terror.
Can you say that a little louder, Candy?
This morning, you went out of your way to avoid the use of the word terrorism in connection with the Libya attack. Right. Do you believe that this was a terrorist attack?
Well, it's too early to know exactly how this came about, what group was involved.
It's been described as a mob action, but there are reports that they were very heavily armed with grenades. That doesn't sound like your normal demonstration.
Right. As I said, we're still investigating exactly what happened.
Anderson, we've all been talking about that Benghazi moment, so we wanted to lay out the facts here. The president claimed that the day after the attacks there, he did call it an act of terror. Romney seemed to suggest he did not. Let's listen.
There were other issues associated with this tragedy. There were many days that passed before we knew whether this was a spontaneous demonstration or actually whether it was a terrorist attack.
The day after the attack, Governor, I stood in the Rose Garden and I told the American people and the world that we were going to find out exactly what happened, that this was an act of terror.
Now, Romney went on to seem to disagree with that. So what are the facts? Let's listen carefully to what the president said in the Rose Garden the morning after the attack.
No acts of terror will ever shake the resolve of this great nation, alter that character, or eclipse the light of the values that we stand for. Today we mourn for more Americans who represent the very best of the United States of America. We will not waver in our commitment to see that justice is done for this terrible act.
Now, you heard it right there.
This morning, you went out of your way to avoid the use of the word terrorism in connection with the Libya attack.
This is an ABC News special report.
Good morning. I'm George Stephanopoulos. We are rejoining you again because President Obama is about to speak in the White House Rose Garden about the violence that broke out in Libya overnight. As we have said, 4 Americans killed, including the U.S. ambassador. It came when a group of armed and angry militants attacked the consulate there. They had guns. They appears to have had rockets. They set the consulate on fire. There were several Americans inside being guarded by Libyan security. And at the time right now, we do know that the ambassador and 3 other Americans, including an information officer, have been killed. It was all sparked by an anti-Muslim film produced by an Israeli living in California. That film also sparked protests and attacks on the U.S. Embassy in Cairo. President Obama has already put out a written statement this morning condemning the attacks, ordering increased security at American diplomatic posts around the world. Jake, the president had been informed of this early overnight and first had been told that the ambassador was unaccounted for. But as I say that now, the president is walking out. So let's go right behind you to the president of the United States.
Good morning. Every day, all across the world, American diplomats and civilians work tirelessly to advance the interests and values of our nation. Often, they are away from their families. Sometimes they brave great danger. Yesterday, 4 of these extraordinary Americans were killed in an attack on our diplomatic post in Benghazi. Among those killed was our ambassador, Chris Stevens, as well as Foreign Service Officer Sean Smith. We are still notifying the families of the others who were killed. And today, the American people stand united in holding the families of the 4 Americans in our thoughts and in our prayers. The United States condemns in the strongest terms this outrageous and shocking attack. We're working with the government of Libya to secure our diplomats. I've also directed my administration to increase our security at diplomatic posts around the world. And make no mistake, we will work with the Libyan government to bring to justice the killers who attacked our people. Since our founding, the United States has been a nation that respects all faiths. We reject all efforts to denigrate the religious beliefs of others. But there is absolutely no justification to this type of senseless violence. None. The world must stand together to unequivocally reject these brutal acts. Already, many Libyans have joined us in doing so, and this attack will not break the bonds between the United States and Libya. Libyan security personnel fought back against the attackers alongside Americans. Libyans helped some of our diplomats find safety, and they carried Ambassador Stevens' body to the hospital, where we tragically learned that he had died. It's especially tragic that Chris Stevens died in Benghazi because it is a city that he helped to save. At the height of the Libyan revolution, Chris led our diplomatic post in Benghazi. With characteristic skill, courage, and resolve, he built partnerships with Libyan revolutionaries and helped them as they planned to build a new Libya. When the Gaddafi regime came to an end, Chris was there to serve as our ambassador to the new Libya, and he worked tirelessly to support this young democracy, and I think both Secretary Clinton and I relied deeply on his knowledge of the situation on the ground there. He was a role model to all who worked with him and to the young diplomats who aspire to walk in his footsteps. Along with his colleagues, Chris died in a country that is still striving to emerge from the recent experience of war. Today, the loss of these 4 Americans is fresh, but our memories of them linger on. I have no doubt that their legacy will live on through the work that they did far from our shores and in the hearts of those who love them back home. Of course, yesterday was already a painful day for our nation as we marked the solemn memory of the 9/11 attacks. We mourned with the families who were lost on that day. I visited the graves of troops who made the ultimate sacrifice in Iraq and Afghanistan at the hallowed grounds of Arlington Cemetery and had the opportunity to say thank you and visit some of our wounded warriors at Walter Reed. And then last night, we learned the news of this attack in Benghazi. As Americans, let us never, ever forget that our freedom is only sustained because there are people who are willing to fight for it, to stand up for it, and in some cases, lay down their lives for it. Our country is only as strong as the character of our people and the service of those, both civilian and military, who represent us around the globe. No acts of terror will ever shake the resolve of this great nation, alter that character, or eclipse the light of the values that we stand for. Today, we mourn for more Americans who represent the very best of the United States of America. We will not waver in our commitment to see that justice is done for this terrible act, and make no mistake, justice will be done. But we also know that the lives these Americans led stand in stark contrast to those of their attackers. These 4 Americans stood up for freedom and human dignity. They should give every American great pride in the country that they served and the hope that our flag represents to people around the globe who also yearn to live in freedom and with dignity. We grieve with their families, but let us carry on their memory and let us continue their work of seeking a stronger America and a better world for all of our children. Thank you, May God bless the memory of those we lost, and may God bless the United States of America.
Was this an act of
President
war?
Obama with Secretary Clinton in the Rose Garden being asked if this was an act of war as he walks away. He is now heading to the State Department to express his condolences personally, calling this an outrageous and shocking attack, and he vows the killers will be brought to justice. I do want to go to Martha Raddatz now, who's been covering this all night long. That's right. Several Americans were stuck in that consulate when it was set on fire by the militants. And of course, the militants inflamed by this pretty obscure film, Innocence of Muslims, only been shown once in its entirety in a movie theater in Hollywood. But the trailer has been out on the internet since July, and it's clearly inflaming Muslims around the world.
It really is. In fact, apparently they're blocking that YouTube in Afghanistan, and the Taliban is vowing revenge from Afghanistan. Our reporter Mohammed Leela tells us from there that the Taliban is issuing statements. Everyone is on guard, George. Everyone at all embassies now is on guard, on high alert. The U.S. fears this could spread.
For years now, dating back a more recent example, or a less recent example, having to do with those cartoons in that newspaper in Europe. But I would like to touch on one thing. When President Obama was talking about potential involvement in Libya, this type of blowback, this type of unexpected consequence, unintended consequence, is one of the things that he was concerned about, and why he kept challenging his national security team when Secretary Clinton and others were pushing for involvement. And so we see that obviously there are always unintended consequences when the U.S. gets involved in a foreign country.
On the anniversary of the 9/11 attacks, Americans and American symbols in 2 Arab countries tonight are under attack by radical Islamist forces, and someone at the American consulate in Benghazi is dead. Unclear if that.
We're not aware of any actionable intelligence indicating that an attack on the U.S. mission in Benghazi was planned or imminent. This is not a case of protests directed at the United States.
It began spontaneously.
We've seen rage and violence directed at American embassies.
Sparked by this hateful video.
Over an awful internet video that we had nothing to do with.
Protests that arose because of the outrage over the video.
This video is disgusting.
Disgusting and reprehensible.
Where there is an offensive video or cartoon.
There was a hateful video.
This is in response to a video that is offensive.
You don't really believe that?
Chris, absolutely I believe that, because in fact it's the case.
They weren't there to demonstrate about some obscure film.
As Leon Panetta said, it was obviously a terrorist attack.
The government there saying that they had warned the United States about the situation in Benghazi and that it was deteriorating.
Days before the attack, there were warnings about insufficient security in Benghazi.
Chris Stevens was the first U.S. ambassador killed in more than 30 years.
Said in the months before his death, he talked about being worried about the never-ending security threats.
I don't know how you argue we weren't caught flat-footed.
Specifically about the rise in Islamic extremism and growing al-Qaeda presence.
It leads to questions.
Does it make any sense to you the level of, or the small level of security he apparently had with him?
The White House story crumbling.
I would say yes. They were killed in the course of a terrorist attack.
Hillary Clinton admitted that al-Qaeda was involved.
It wasn't just a mob action.
He said, it is self-evident that what happened in Benghazi was a terrorist attack.
What happened in Benghazi was a terrorist attack.
U.S. officials knew within 24 hours that this was an organized al-Qaeda attack.
Which said the U.S. government knew about al-Qaeda's involvement within 24 hours of the attack.
In the intelligence community, there are those who within the first 24 hours were saying this was a terrorist attack.
Why did Ambassador Rice give the American people bad information?
There is more proof that this was all part of an elaborate cover-up by the administration.
It's either gross incompetence and negligence, or in fact they are lying.
The president has a big investment in the narrative that not only is Osama dead, but al-Qaeda is finished.
And some of these militias are affiliated with al-Qaeda.
Al-Qaeda is very much alive. Clear that al-Qaeda is alive and well.
Bin Laden dead, al-Qaeda alive.
I was pretty certain, and continue to be pretty certain, that there are going to be bumps in the road.